Comrades, I can't tell you how happy I am to be on the platform with Zbigniew Kowalewski, and I want to explain why. In 1981, end of 1981, beginning of 1982, when Eva and I were writing the IS Journal on the military coup in Poland, the terrible defeat of this magnificent workers' movement in Poland, and we were saying to ourselves, and talking to Chris Harman and other comrades on the phone, and saying, surely there must be somewhere in Poland some bloody socialists. And we couldn't see any evidence of them at all. We didn't see them anywhere. And then after our thing came out, lamenting, in a sense, the terrible defeat and the rest of it, there appeared in the Labour Focus on Eastern Europe an article by Zbigniew Kowalewski which said, amongst other things, there are some socialists in Poland and I'm one of them. And this is how we fought in Łódź, and so on and so on. And so this is, for me, a very great pleasure. Last year, Zbigniew was only here on a video screen. This year, he's here in the flesh. And I'd really like to extend the warmest welcome to a revolutionary socialist from Poland. Now, the importance of solidarity for our politics is enormous, because I don't think there's any question that Solidarnosc in Poland was the most impressive workers' movement that we have seen, most of us, in our lifetimes. There are very few comrades in the organisation who can say in their lifetimes that they've seen anything more impressive than solidarity. What it revealed was the immense revolutionary potential of the working class, the power of the working class when organised to change the world. That's the immense positive gain from the experience of solidarity. The other side of it, also crucial for our politics, is that there was tragically no revolutionary socialist organisation in Poland to offer leadership to that movement as it went through its growth and finally its defeat. And I'll come back to that question at the end, but that's also obviously a crucial lesson for us. Now, I don't think there's any doubt that, as I say, solidarity in Poland was the most impressive workers' movement in the world since the war. You see, it started really with the occupation of the shipyard in Gdansk. But out of that occupation of the shipyard, against the background of a whole series of strikes all across Poland, there developed, because of the way in which the strike in the shipyard developed, a new kind of organisation amongst the Polish workers, called the Inter-Factory Strike Committee. And the first Inter-Factory Strike Committee grew up around the Gdansk shipyard. But then, in other parts of Poland, in the month of August of 1980, as the strikes spread and the occupation spread, they sprang up in other centres, in Wrocław, in Silesia, in the mining area, and elsewhere, other inter-factory strike committees. And these inter-factory strike committees consisted of delegates from occupied workplaces. And if you want a sense of the size of the movement, the Gdansk Inter-Factory Strike Committee, or MKS as it was called in Polish, had at the climax 700 workplaces affiliated to it. 700 delegates from striking, occupying workplaces sent, those organisations sent delegates to Gdansk, to the Inter-Factory Strike Committee. And that body was impressive, firstly, in the fact that it didn't organise at all on the basis of trade or industry or differentiation within the working class. The single basis on which you could send a delegate to your Inter-Factory Strike Committee was that you were on strike. And so in Silesia, for example, there were huge mines of tens of thousands of workers, because there are very big mines in Silesia, on the Inter-Factory Strike Committee, but also a striking beauty salon, equally represented because they also had struck and occupied in support of the workers' movement. That's the first thing. A cross-class organisation that did not bother about differentiation within the working class, that represented all fighting workers, and several million workers were involved in this movement in August of 1980. The second thing is that this movement, once it had moved from individual workplaces into forming inter-factory strike committees, formulated new demands. And those demands ceased to be simply economic demands from the workers. For the particular workplace, they became class demands, and therefore they became political demands. First demand, in the 21 demands in Gdansk, was the demand for free trade unions, independent of the regime. There was a demand for the abolition of censorship, a demand for the right of the church to broadcast mass on the radio, which may sound a peculiar demand for workers to raise. Certainly in the context of Britain we wouldn't expect it, but in Poland a very political demand. a demand that all the dissidents that had been arrested and that supported the workers should immediately be freed from jail. In fact, the workers refused to end their strike until they had a guarantee from the government that the intellectual dissidents would be released from jail, and so on and so on. Political demands and a class form of organisation. And I don't think it was apparent to us at the time, but it is, in hindsight, very apparent that what the Polish workers had done, out of the fruits of their own bitter experience of struggle ever since the war, from 1956, 1970, 1976, when three times previously Polish workers had gone into battle with their regime, out of the bitter experiences of those previous struggles, they had invented a new form of organisation. Or, to be more precise, they had reinvented an old one. And the old form of organisation they had reinvented in the Inter-Factory Strike Committee was something very close to what in Russia in 1905 they called the Soviet. An organisation which unified economic and political demands and fought for the working class as a whole. That's how the Soviet in 1905 really grew. Only in Poland it began on a much, much larger scale because of the higher level of capitalist development. In Poland, of course, by comparison with Tsarist Russia in 1905. So the MKS was a Soviet organisation. It called itself a trade union, but it was always more than a trade union. And I don't think we can understand anything of the dynamics of that movement unless we recognise that. Now, the victory which the workers' movement gained in relation to the government was astonishing by comparison with any previous movement in Poland or anywhere in Eastern Europe. They forced the government to come to the Gdansk shipyard and negotiate with their strike committee, with the executive committee of the workers' inter-factory strike committee, negotiate with them in front of the television, with microphones broadcasting the negotiations all over the shipyard on the tannoy system and so on. They forced them to negotiate and to agree on paper every one of the 21 demands. There's a famous film, which some people may have seen, of Lech Wałęsa, the chairman of the strike committee, at the end of the negotiations, with a great big pen with a picture of the Pope on it, with all the contradictions that involves, signing an agreement with the head of the government on behalf of the workers of Poland in front of the television cameras of the world. A fantastic victory. And there's no question that that victory contributed to the massive growth of the new workers' organisation thereafter. It was a fabulous victory. And in the months that followed, Solidarity, the workers' organisation, the union as they called it, grew and grew and grew. I mean, at the height, it had something approaching 10 million members. And that was a membership achieved in a period of a few months. Now, over 10 million members sounds impressive anyway, but you have to remember the Polish working class is very much smaller than the British working class. So well over, the maximum, I think, in Britain achieved after 150 years of struggle, slow struggle, gradual, bloody Fabian struggle, etc., about 54% organisation of the British working class, the British labour movement. The Poles achieved 80%. 80% in a few months. Get a sense of the attractive power of this movement and of its militancy. It was an astonishing achievement. And needless to say, it met with the implacable hatred of the ruling class. It threw the ruling class into confusion, but they hated it. There's a meeting which was tape recorded by a Solidarity spy, a supposedly secret meeting of the party in the Katowice region, which is the steelworkers region down in the south. And that this leading member of the party was explaining to the security service officers, the secret police officers, that what they must above all do is smash the form of organisation of Solidarity. We must break the idea in the workers' heads, he said, that a fashion designer can be a member of the same organisation as a railwayman. We must sectionalise them, because otherwise they're too strong. We have to break them up in that sort of way. We must also, he said, corrupt the leaders. I mean, very, very, very clear about how you break up a workers' organisation. Corrupt the leaders and use divide and rule as a method. They hated it. But the reality was that for the first 9 months, the workers' organisation, as it grew, gained more and more victories against the regime. And there isn't time to run through the story of the victories. But just one example. Many comrades will remember at least the name of Sarah Tisdall, the civil servant who leaked a few details about cruise missiles to The Guardian. She was jailed for 6 months. In Poland, she was unfortunate. She did it in the wrong time, in the wrong place, in a sense. Because there was a Polish Sarah Tisdall called Piotr Sapiela, who was a civil servant who leaked an even more significant document to Solidarity. And he was arrested together with the guy that was churning it out on a duplicator in the Warsaw offices of Solidarity in the autumn of 1980. Police raided, arrested these two men. The whole of Warsaw, 1 million workers went on strike. And within 48 hours, Sapiello and his friend Narozniak were released from jail, and they were never charged with anything. As I say, it's unfortunate for Sarah Tisdall, she wasn't Polish and not there in early 1981. What you get a sense of in all of this is the immense way in which the confidence of workers as they won victories grew. Changes in the balance of confidence between the classes. Some comrades will have heard the story before, but I'll risk wasting a minute on telling it. A Polish doctor wrote a story in a Polish newspaper about how she'd been in a hospital in charge of nervous complaints in the summer of 1980. And it was full of workers. After all, who gets nervous complaints under capitalist society but the workers, the people at the bottom? They're the people who get paranoia and so on and so on and so on. And in the hospital, the news started to come in from outside of the workers' victories, and her patients started to get better. And they started discharging themselves from hospital against medical advice. And so the hospital nearly emptied, and then a few weeks later it started to fill up again with under-secretaries of party and so on and so on. And she ended her article by saying, and I had to decide an ethical question, should I make these bastards well again? Now, but you get a sense of how, it isn't, when we talk about a change in the balance of class forces, it's a change in the morale of the individuals, both in the ruling class, who were thrown into disarray by the workers' movement, and a change in the morale of ordinary people, of workers, of housewives, of peasants, of students, and so on. And one of the effects of Solidarity, because it was a general movement, a movement for the general emancipation of society, was that it was not confined simply to workers. Behind the workers' movement, there fell in the students of Poland, who occupied every college, effectively, in Poland to reorganize their students' unions, raising new demands about the content of the education system and so on. 3 million peasants fought a long battle with the government for the right to form their own union called, interestingly, Solidarity of the Farmer, taking the workers' organization name. And many of the strikes of the winter and spring of 1981 were, in fact, workers going on strike in support of the peasants' demand rights and so on. So you have this immense movement, and one writer says, for example, about the period of the autumn and winter of 1980 to 81, that what there was in Poland was an orgy of popular participation. You have the real sense of a revolutionary movement developing in Polish society, that even where there were queues outside the meat shops, the queues in the shops would organize. And interestingly, after the military coup, the first thing the government banned was the organization of meat shop queues. Forbade it with a decree within a few days of the military coup. They wanted to smash, atomize every element of organization amongst the Polish people. Now this superb movement, which in a sense illustrates all that we say about the possibilities of working class solidarity and advance, and how the working class can draw the rest of the oppressed and exploited in society behind it in a revolutionary movement, and so on, that movement was defeated. That's the thing that we have to face up to, that magnificent movement was defeated. And we have to ask why. And fundamentally, there is no question that the answer is because of politics, because of the politics of the movement. It was not defeated because of some inexorable law of history. It was defeated because it was led with rotten politics. And the politics of the leadership of Solidarity was summed up in a phrase which was used time and again. We must, they said, pursue the self-limiting revolution. There are all sorts of other phrases like that, but the self-limiting revolution. The reason they said is because of the Russians. Because the Russians, if we go too far, we'll frighten off the Russians. We mustn't go too far. We must contain the movement in some way. The trouble with taking that position as a leadership was that precisely the motto of self-limitation meant that the leadership must, whenever the rank and file moved, seek to contain the membership. There develops within Solidarity remarkably rapidly. There's, on the one hand, the popular ferment, on the other hand, a process of bureaucratization of the leadership of Solidarity. Now, for the first 9 months, the battle, the war of tendencies was on the side of the popular ferment. But it comes up, every movement goes through crises in its development. Solidarity comes to a crisis in March of 1981. Leading activists of Solidarity were beaten up in the town of Bydgoszcz. The whole of Poland was flooded with posters of their injured faces. They're beaten up by the police. There were posters of their faces with their injuries all over Poland. And Poland prepared for a general strike. There was a 4-hour general strike which was completely solid, called by the union, absolutely solid. The television went on strike. If you switched on your television, you saw a logo on the television which said, Solidarnosc, on strike. You get a sense of, rather pleasant thoughts, isn't it? Our answer to EastEnders. Finally, however, then it was decided if that didn't succeed, there was to be an all-out general strike. And there's preparations going on in the factories, people taking sleeping bags into the factories, preparing for an occupation, and so on and so on, a sense of crisis. And Lech Wałęsa, the chairman of the union, receives a message from the Pope via celestial satellite saying that the Pope believes that workers in Poland do not want to go on strike. The church puts pressure on Lech Wałęsa. Lech Wałęsa, almost on his own, goes and negotiates a secret agreement with the government and then appears on television with Andrzej Gwiazda, a radical who he conned into it from the city of Gdańsk, and announces on television, the strike is off. The strike is off. Now, there's a very important observation we have to make about this, not simply that it was a terrible thing to do and a terrible sellout moment, but also it's very important to note that there were no wildcat strikes. Everybody was building for the general strike. But nowhere in Poland was there a group of radicals who had begun to sense the problem and begun to organise on a rank-and-file level independently of the leadership. So the strike was called off and it was just solid to stop. There was no strike anywhere. Nowhere did there happen a single, as far as I know, unless perhaps Zbigniew can correct me on this, I don't think there was a single strike. It just, the whole movement stopped. And they spread amongst workers fantastic mood of demoralization. There are reports from the early summer of 1981. Members are going to, the attendance at Solidarnosc meetings is dropping off. They are electing delegates to the Congress in the autumn, and workers are no longer standing because they don't know what to say. You have to make a speech, and workers are no longer willing to speak at the meetings to elect delegates. There's a demoralization develops in Solidarity. There's a revival in the summer after that. Wildcat strikes, hunger marches, the movement that Zbigniew was particularly involved in the summer and the autumn of 1981, where the unofficial movement starts to develop inside Solidarity, but never with the degree of coherence and always with the opposition of the leadership, with Lech Wałęsa rushing around Poland, declaring that his job was that of a fireman, putting out fires. Those fires were the fires of workers' resistance to the crisis, and so on and so on. Now those ideas, there isn't time really to go into it, but those ideas, we have to ask where those ideas of the self-limiting revolution and all that went with it came from. There are three sources really. One is, very quickly, the church, which plays the same role in Poland fundamentally, with differences, but nonetheless fundamentally the same sort of role that Neil Kinnock plays in British politics. Actually plays it a bit better sometimes than Neil Kinnock. But Neil Kinnock says to the workers occasionally, he says, your grievances against capitalism, he doesn't use the word capitalism, that's left to the Methodist Church, but he says, your grievances against capitalism are justified, but you shouldn't do anything about them, leave it to us. Well, the church says the same. Neil Kinnock says, put a cross on a piece of paper, the church says, crush yourself, but the principle is the same. That's one source, the church, a conservative force within the workers' movement. The second source is, by and large, the Polish intelligentsia, with honourable exception, mostly played a conservative, moderating role in the movement, and they were very important in the movement, more important perhaps than almost any workers' movement we've ever seen. The intelligentsia were too much in the heart of the movement. And the third, perhaps the most tragic case, is the case of the former left. People like Colin and Montelewski, particularly Colin, and others who had been revolutionaries in the 1960s, who'd been very, very brave radicals, all during the period of isolation of the 60s and the 70s, who'd gone in and out of jail, who had been revolutionaries in the 1960s, but who changed their minds and had become reformists. And they had much more credibility in the workers' movement in some ways, and when they spoke, workers listened in a way that they wouldn't listen to sometimes people with more moderate histories. And they also were arguing essentially the same case. And the tragedy is that no other voice, really, was properly articulated. There were little groups of people in different parts of Poland who argued for a different kind of perspective, but without any degree of clarity, without any degree of coherence, and crucially, without any proper organisation. See, there were radical currents within Solidarity. All kinds of radical currents. People who were dissatisfied with the leadership. Workers who felt that the union was too soft on the bosses. There's no way of judging. Probably, very often they were in a minority, but they were a significant minority. but they had no expression for their views. There was no organisation expressing their views and trying to bring them together and to give them a voice within Solidarity to be more effective. And so you get the Conference of Solidarity in the autumn of 1981, and Lech Wałęsa is standing as the president. And three candidates stand against him, and the most radical of them probably was a man called Andrzej Gwiazda. Gwiazda of Gdansk, who had broken with Wałęsa over his behaviour during the general strike. And Gwiazda was asked in the conference, in the period when there was a question and answer session for each candidate. First question, why are you standing as president? And this is the moment when he can make his speech about what he stands for, what's the way forward, and so on. And he says, because the rules allow me to do so. And he has nothing to say. I mean, it's not a question of criticising the individual. He had nothing actually concretely to offer. He was isolated, and so a lot of the left was very personalistic in its criticisms of Wałęsa, but didn't really have an alternative strategy, programme, tactics to offer and to fight for inside Solidarity. And so all sorts of opportunities were missed. The opportunity to agitate amongst the police, many of whom wanted to join Solidarity. Nobody organised demonstrations outside the police stations when policemen were sacked from the police for being Solidarity supporters. And it could have been done. Strange idea, perhaps, to demonstrate in support of the cops. But yes, it would be absolutely right in those circumstances. Nobody organised in the army when there was a conscript army, and there were possibilities of doing propaganda work in the army. Zbigniew made this criticism in his article in the spring of 1982, and so on. And finally, in the movement rose and fell and rose and fell, and in the moment of its second decline, with a very low level of strikes, in the late autumn of the early winter of 1981, when the level of strikes was almost zero, then the army struck on the night of December the 13th, 1981, against the background of a movement that was already partly internally defeated. I think we have to be quite clear about it. That was when the army struck, when it was at its strongest and the workers' movement had gone through a period of demoralisation. Now, Solidarity at its peak was a movement which was an inspiration to workers across the world. In Zambia, on the copper belt, striking copper miners wore Solidarnosc in Polish on their t-shirts. When Reagan jailed the Air Traffic Controllers Union chief in America, the striking air traffic controllers wore Solidarnosc in Polish on their t-shirts. It was an inspiration. But defeat of Solidarity has also an effect internationally. It's contributed to the international downturn in working class struggle to which we have become accustomed, in a sense, as a feature of the 1980s. And there are interconnections internationally between one workers' movement and another. They're very difficult to assess, but they're very real. The defeat of Solidarity was a defeat for us, as much as for the Polish workers. It was a defeat for the whole of Eastern Europe, in terms of all those workers who must be looking in Czechoslovakia and Hungary with hope that perhaps Solidarity would kick the door down and they would be able to march through behind. A defeat for them, a defeat for the world working class. However, the defeat is not the end. It's quite clear also, if you go to Poland, that the Solidarity is not beaten. It's down, but it's not beaten any more than the working class movement in this country is any more than down. It isn't beaten, it isn't destroyed, it's still there. And in the process, there were big strikes in the early part of this year, and it's quite clear that there are processes inside Solidarity, the new generation of activists and militants coming up. There's a new generation coming, and there are processes of internal clarification and argument going on. We always guessed there must be, but now we know there are. How do we know? Because now, for the first time within the last few months, there's been announced the formation inside Poland of a new organisation, Polish Socialist Party, the PPS. It's the name of a social democratic formation from before the war and during the war that was eventually destroyed by the Stalinists in the period after the war. It doesn't matter what the name is, there's an openly socialist organisation with several hundred members which campaigned during the strikes and which is more militant than Lech Wałęsa and his friends, which is more to the left. And inside it, there is no question, there will be all sorts of processes of argument and ideological clarification and may well be splits, but the possibilities in terms of the audience for that party in the Polish working class has gone through this fantastic experience that is not absolutely destroyed, that hasn't had a chilly done to it, but merely numbers of arrests of people mostly being released and so on. It's an open party. They are campaigning openly on their politics. They wear badges saying PPS member in the street and at work and so on. Very, very exciting, and above all, it is a breakthrough. It's the first time that we've seen the formation and open development of an independent socialist organisation anywhere in Eastern Europe since Stalin. And this is a fantastic breakthrough, and it offers whole new perspectives of possibility for the future, and therefore we should be very, very excited about it. We have to be clear, just to end, and my time is up, that what is clearly needed in Poland is what we are trying to build in Britain. A socialist organisation, revolutionary socialist organisation with clear politics, which is able to respond realistically to developments in the Polish working class, to make propaganda about ideas, to agitate for in fights, and so on, to build a revolutionary leadership in Poland. They need it in Poland. We need them to build it in Poland. They need us to build here to help them to build in Poland, because every time they succeed in Poland, it strengthens us. Every time we have a success here, it helps them. And so there is an international connection. Long live the Polish Socialist Revolution, and long live the SWP.
Straight over to Zbigniew Kowalewski.
The first thing I must explain you is that I speak very bad and poor English. I am very happy that I am here at this platform with Colin Barker, because his book on solidarity, in my opinion, it is the best book written by a foreigner on the experience of the Polish Revolution of 1881. Not only, even if it is very important, not only because it is written from a very clear revolutionary socialist perspective, but also because it is based on a very serious study of the experience of solidarity. Probably I have with Colin some differences in the analysis of the situation of solidarity in the first place after this affair of the general strike in March 81. That was called off by Lech Walesa and some other leaders close to him. But it is true that a crisis at this moment started in this movement, but in my opinion, some months after, a new upsurge of this movement began. And I would like to explain some experiences of 81 after this collapse of the project of general strike. We had the same night when Lech Walesa made a compromise with the regime and called off the strike, the president of my regional organization, who was a member of the delegation of the leadership of Solidarity, arrived to our city and said to us, a compromise was made. We cannot accept this compromise. We must defend the idea of the general strike. We must vote for the general strike in the meeting of the national leadership of Solidarity. And we called a general assembly of delegates of the region some hours after, and the decision in this sense was adopted, to defend the idea of the general strike and to vote in this sense at the meeting in Gdańsk. But our position was minority one inside the movement. It was for us a very important experience. A discussion started between us. I was not in this moment a member of the regional leadership. 2 months after I was elected to this to this leadership. And the first problem was this movement has no perspective. In March, there was a possibility of a general open conflict between the mass movement, the workers' movement, and the regime. The determination of the masses was extremely strong. I remember very good, my city is the city of working women, working fundamentally in the textile industry. The determination of this working woman was very strong. There was a general conviction, I don't know if it was a just conviction, that if this general strike starts, there will be an intervention of the Soviet army. But the determination was the following one: we will be crushed by the Soviet army, but before it, this government will be crushed. And in this moment, no speech on the danger of the Soviet intervention was important for the workers. But after this decision of Walesa, the situation changed in the terms more or less presented by Colin. In any case, some sectors inside Solidarity started to look for a new perspective for this movement. And I think that we must be clear, in March, during the preparation for the general strike, there was no idea what to make if this regime is crushed in this general strike. Really, there was no idea. It was a decision to protest massively and even to overthrow this government, but after no idea of workers' power. In the following months, after this bad experience, the new situation started to develop. In the first place, the idea that it is impossible to be only a union, a trade union. The illusion that existed before, that if we have 8 and after 10 million workers' organization, completely independent of the regime, the state will follow another policy, this illusion collapsed. The debates started on the question, in the first place, of the workers' control of the factories. It was the idea of the so-called workers' self-management. The original idea was of this workers' self-management at the factory level. It was a very simple idea, and this idea was started to be very quickly supported by more and more workers. In my regional leadership was the first inside Solidarity that launched publicly the campaign for the establishment of the workers' councils in the factories to run the factories, with the slogan, all the power in the factories to the workers' councils. The workers' councils democratically elected and so on. But the slogan was limited. All the power in the factories, only in the factories, nothing more. So, but it was limited, but the term power was there. The power of workers' councils. And the development of these workers' councils started in some places, in some cities before this situation of March 81. The real development, a very large development, began in July and August 81. At the end of the year, at the moment of the military coup, we had the workers' councils established in 30% of enterprises in the country. But in the first place, in the big factories. Now, with the establishment of these workers' councils, with the election of it, the idea was launched by Solidarity, by sectors of Solidarity, defended by our union. Finally, the national leadership in August accepted formally this idea with many problems, with many reserves, but it was important, this acceptation, to develop this movement. And the struggle started in the factories to establish the actual workers' power inside the factories, to subordinate the administration to the democratic representation of the workers, to decide democratically on the plans of the enterprise, or the plans of production, the type of production, what we need for the satisfaction of the social needs, and so on. It was an excellent debate, extremely important for the advance of the class consciousness of the workers. But when and where these workers' councils were established, it began to be clear that you cannot have all the power of the workers' councils only in the factories. And at this moment, the idea was launched that it is necessary to build a pyramid of the workers' councils, to establish the coordination of the workers' councils in the regions, and to fight for the management of the economy, of the state sector of the economy in the regions by these workers' councils, and the same thing at the national level. In this movement for workers' self-management, two currents existed. I think that the two currents were very important, even if strong differences between them were present. The first current was the so-called network of the biggest of solidarity organizations of the biggest factories in the country, of 17 biggest factories. The task of this horizontal structure inside Solidarity was the horizontal development of this movement for workers' self-management, the establishment of the workers' councils, and to fight for the workers' power in the factories. But this current was operating inside the strategy of the so-called self-limited revolution. So their conception was the following one. We can have the workers' power in the factories, but it is impossible to overthrow this regime because we will have the Soviet intervention here. So, of course, only with the workers' power in the factories, we cannot weaken this regime. We cannot weaken the central bureaucracy. We must have something more. And what if you have no political solution, revolutionary solution? You have illusions. So the idea was the market economy. The factories run by the workers' councils and the economy run by the market and not by the central bureaucracy. Even if their conception was wrong and very limited, it was in a practical manner, in the sense of organization of the workers' councils, their contribution was very important. The other current that exists, this current started in my regional organization, and some months after represented, it was an interregional current inside Solidarity and inside the movement of workers' councils. The positions of this current were more advanced. Not the idea of the market economy, but the idea of the democratic, socialized planning through the organs established on the base of the workers' councils. Our project, and we started to implement it immediately, in the first moment was to build the regional coordinations of the workers' councils. The second one, to call for a national congress of delegates of workers' councils and to establish a permanent national body to fight for the workers' power for all the state sector of the economy. In this moment, there was impossible to launch inside Solidarity. Of course, if a revolutionary party exists, it was possible, but a revolutionary party didn't exist. It was impossible to launch the slogan of the political power because the masses were not prepared for this idea. And it was extremely important to have the slogans, and not only slogans, but also the concrete measures to develop, to rise the level, the political level of the masses. And I think that this idea of all the economic power in the hands of the workers, this idea was easily accepted. Easier at the beginning than the idea of political power. I think that was important to advance through the experience, through the organization of workers' councils, through their struggle for the power in the factories, through their experiences to debate the economic plans for the regions and so on. I think that it was important. And in this framework of this struggle, we had some experiences linked to it, and I think that one of the most advanced and extremely important in the sense to give a confidence to the masses was the experience we made of a struggle and establishment of the social control of the distribution in my city. It is a very big city of 1 million
inhabitants.
Yes.
People.
1 million people, yes. We had a very tragic situation with the food. All industrial centers in Poland in this moment were in a very critical situation in a very direct manner. The problem of the food was completely fundamental. When I read I read as a young boy the book by John Reed on the Bolshevik Revolution, and what I experienced in '81 in my city, for me, it was the situation of Petrograd in the weeks before the Bolshevik Revolution. I don't know if you remember what John Reed wrote on the situation. And it not in a very underdeveloped country like Russia of the moment, no? But in an industrialized country with a different level of development. It was absolutely tragic situation. So there started a revolt, and it is, I said, the city of working women started a revolt against this tragic situation. The strikes, spontaneous strikes, in protest against the situation where you had money, but there was no food. And it was crazy to work in these conditions, to have pieces of paper without the possibility to buy food. Our position was, it is not a situation to protest. It is necessary to make an experience that the masses can manage the system of distribution even in a big city. A hunger march of 50,000 working women was organized to provoke an upsurge in the mobilization of the masses against the situation and for the social control of distribution. This fight was wygrana.
With one, victorious.
This fight was wygrana.
With one, victorious.
This fight was victorious. The regime accepted, but only in the city, because in the city there was a consequent struggle under the slogan of social control of distribution. The regime accepted the social control by solidarity. And even something more, the printing of the tickets for food rationing that existed, not by the central state bureaucracy, but by our union. Why it was extremely important? Because at the beginning there was no confidence in the masses that the working class is able to make something like this. That the working class, without the state apparatus, can organize the social control of distribution, can organize better than the state bureaucracy the rationing of the food, to control it, to smash the privileges existing in this field, and so on, the corruption. And all of it was made. And the system of distribution started to function in a better manner. Before, it was necessary to make
Have queues, to have long queues.
to make queues to buy meat during 3 days. And 3 days. And after the establishment of this social control of distribution, only 8 or 6 hours. It was human. It was human. 3 days it was not human. And it gave this confidence that nearly all is possible, that the self-organization of the masses, the self-management, can be a base for the building of a new state apparatus of the workers and of the people. Now, to finish this, I would like to say two things. Of course, the mistakes were enormous, but we must remember one thing. There was not a revolutionary party, and we cannot accuse the Solidarity leaders that they didn't act like a revolutionary party, because this didn't exist. So I think that the most important question is to learn from this, the experience of Solidarity, the enormous capacity of the working class, of self-organization, self-activity, self-management of their struggles, of the factories, of the and so on, and the capacity to radicalize through the struggle. At the end of '81, there was a very strong situation of radicalization. I think that I have a difference in the analysis of situation with Colin on it. On the basis of all these experiences of the building of workers' councils, of the struggle for the workers' power in the factories, of the building of the regional coordinations of workers' councils, the experience of social control of distribution, even if limited only to one big city, and so on. On the basis of it, the radicalization started to be extremely important inside the working class, and in the first place in the biggest factories. At the end of '81, the slogans the massive slogans in the big factories are the following one: the social control of the economy, the social control of the radio and the television, and the free elections to the parliament. These three slogans, of course, they were not slogans to take the power. It was too limited. But they were extremely advanced in this situation when a revolutionary party didn't exist. The Solidarity leadership as a whole, not only its reformist sectors, but also the radicalized sectors, made many mistakes. And I think that the most important of them was not prepare Solidarity and the working class for the attack of the bureaucracy. And it was possible, even without a revolutionary party, it was possible to prepare the form of mass self-defense against the military coup. It was absolutely possible. But for example, the slogan was launched by my regional leadership. It was one of these things when we were more advanced than some other sectors inside the Solidarity leadership. We launched this idea in August, but we started an open general propaganda on the necessity of the building of workers' guards. It was the name for the militia, workers' militia, workers' guards, only the 9th of December, 4 days before the military coup. A general open propaganda, and not a call to establish immediately it. And with the level of organization we had in the factories at the regional level, it was very easy in 24 hours, or in some cases in 48 hours in all the big factories of the city to establish the workers' guards, to arm them with the instruments of work, of course, in a very primitive manner, but it was absolutely possible. And I think that it was possible nationally, and it was possible to stop the attack of the regime some days after, and the defeat of Solidarity. Not to obtain the victory, of course, no? But to kończ. Zatrzymać.
To halt. To halt.
Albo uniemożliwić.
To make impossible to...
In any case, to make impossible in this moment the victory of the bureaucracy. It was, I think, absolutely possible.
He's going to get the lion's share of the time to sum up.
It will be difficult for me to comment all these programs because there is a lot, but some of them. On the last question, it is impossible now to make a deeper debate on the different phases of the dynamics of this movement in '81 and after March, after the affair of Bydgoszcz. My conviction, it was based on my observations, is that what I said, that in July, August, new upsurge began and was in development till the military coup. I think that some weeks, if we have not at this moment the attack of the bureaucracy, that some weeks after, or I don't know, 1 or 2 months after, it was possible to have a new Bydgoszcz situation, but in this case with more perspectives than before, with more experience of the working class, with the differentiations, political differentiations, even if not very clear, but some political differentiations inside Solidarity leadership. I think that military coup was at the moment when military command, military sector of the bureaucracy was clear that the situation began to be dangerous. That there can be a dynamics going toward the repetition of the situation of Bydgoszcz, but at a higher political level. Évidemment, obviously, I am living in France now. Obviously, all this question is open to a debate, and it is not the first case after a defeat of a revolution. I think that. The problem of transmission of the message through the radio, not the television in Poland, the small conquest of Solidarity. The problem is of the conception we have of the workers' power, workers' democratic power. I defend the idea that in the system of workers' democratic power, the freedom for the church, for its activity, is absolutely necessary. And if we have this incredible situation that the workers must put and they demand something like the transmission of the mass for the old people who cannot go to the church through the radio once a week. It is only the effect of this totalitarian situation we have, and where it is necessary to struggle for many democratic things, even in the sense of the defense of some liberties for the church, for the wierzących,
For believers.
for believers, and so on. We have a very important movements in this last years in Soviet Union, in some parts of Soviet Union, that I think that it is necessary to support this movement for the freedom of the believers, of the Ukrainian Catholic Church that is underground because it was smashed by Stalin, or the repression against the Catholics in Baltic states of the Soviet Union. And there are mass movements with the demands of the religious freedoms. I think that the religious freedom is absolutely necessary to finish with this type of struggle, and to orient the people toward the political goals. But it is very difficult in the situation of totalitarian regime. The ideas of workers' self-management arrived to Poland, appeared in Poland fundamentally in '56, on the base of a very, very important democratic mass movement we had, and the first experience of spontaneously established workers' councils. These workers' councils were established in this moment to run the factories. It was the idea of the workers. It was for the working class. This idea of workers' self-management was a conquest. This idea was distorted, deformed by the bureaucracy in the following years. But it was very significant that when the working class started the struggle in Poland, some months after, the same demand of '56 appeared, and with a lot of references to the experience of '56. Now, in '56, the term workers' self-management arrived from Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was independent of Moscow, and there was some attraction in Poland for the so-called Yugoslav model, even if this model was not known by the workers, of course. But the term workers' self-management appeared concretely in this manner. On glasnost and so on, I think that something is very important, and it is not necessarily known by all the people in the West. So-called glasnost in Poland started before Gorbachev. It exists, the so-called democratic reform promised by Gorbachev. It exists in Poland, and partially even it started in '56. A lot of liberties that exist very limited. For example, for some types of intellectual activities. Some freedom of scientific research, some freedom of the scientific contacts, exchanges with the West, the possibility to travel of the Polish citizens. Practically all Polish citizens, if they have money, of course, no? can travel even to the United States. No? And it is not the case in the Soviet Union, I think that even now, with Gorbachev. So, the Polish representative of glasnost and perestroika is Jaruzelski. But in Poland, the working class has not a lot of illusions in Jaruzelski. It is probably some difference with the situation in the Soviet Union, because the Soviet working class didn't make the experiences like the Polish working class with the so-called bureaucratic reformists, the so-called radical reformists inside the regime, and so on. So there is a very strong skepticism, yes? Skepticism in the Polish popular opinion on the Gorbachev reform, even if a lot of oppositional leaders like Kuroń, ex-revolutionary Marxist, like Adam Michnik, ex-revolutionary Marxist, are supporting the Gorbachev's reforms and saying that it's extremely important for the Polish situation. Of course, it is important if the working class start to intervene, start to develop an independent activity in the Soviet Union, and now the conditions with the so-called reforms there are better than under Brezhnev. It is absolutely clear.
Thank you very much. Zbigniew will be here till tomorrow evening, so if you catch him in the bar or in the coffee bar or whatever, he'd be pleased to talk to you. And he's not averse to a bit of argument either. Right, Colin, to sum up. And after that, I would ask people to stay behind a very important announcement.
Okay, comrades, I've got to be pressed for time, so I'm just going to pick up a couple of questions just to finish. The first question about the selling of socialist ideas in Poland, as it were. Somebody asked, is it possible to convince workers of socialist ideas in Poland, given the grip of Stalinist ideas and so on and so on? Let's be clear, two things. Firstly, don't exaggerate the grip of Stalinist ideas in Poland. Just as you shouldn't exaggerate the grip of Christian ideas as preached by Mrs. Thatcher in this country. I mean, in reality, there is a great deal of scepticism amongst Polish workers, to put it mildly, as a matter of fact, about the claims of the regime. The key thing that any socialist would have to appeal to in Poland to win workers to socialist ideas is the recent history of the Polish working class's own experience. It is a fantastic experience to be able to point to about the possibilities of workers' organisation, about the possibilities of working class transformation of society. There are many Polish workers who feel it in their bones that they lost a battle they could have won. And that is a fantastic material to work on if you're arguing as a revolutionary socialist, better than anything that we've got available to us in Britain. In reality, the situation is more open to socialist ideas in Poland in 1988 than it probably is in Britain. We could grow faster. Our organisation could grow faster in Poland than it can in Britain in this period. Just the objective circumstances of the level of consciousness amongst workers. Not that we would win millions, but we could win tens and hundreds and thousands quite quickly. Now, the PPS is very much smaller. It will grow more slowly because it is harder to attract people to a smaller organisation. Nonetheless, the prospect for its growth, if it doesn't blow itself up with stupidities, and we can all do these things. I haven't time to tell you my own life story. We can all do these things. If they don't do that, they have very, very good prospects for good development in the coming period, however, whatever that might mean. The other question, you see, is asked about the development of the left inside the PPS. There are, as I gather it, partly from what Zbigniew has told me, there are indeed revolutionary socialists inside the PPS. There are revolutionaries, there are people who probably are not sure about reform and revolution, but definitely on the left. There is more of a right-wing current, and so on. That's what you'd expect. In a brand new organisation, people are attracted to the idea of socialism, coming with different kinds of ideas, and so on. There will be all sorts of internal discussions and arguments. Let's be quite clear about something. What is our duty in relation to this? I don't believe that it is simply to express solidarity with the PPS and with the Polish movement. It is actually, if we're real internationalists and socialists, it is to argue, to present ideas, not simply the ideas where we agree with them, but also the ideas where we disagree. We have to be a little bit arrogant. Not too arrogant, because we haven't very much basis in historical experience who came to be very arrogant. We can rest, however, on the fact that for a generation and more, we have been able to be involved openly in socialist politics and to accumulate some experience. We have been openly able to discuss the international working class experience across the world in meetings like this, and so on, in a way that has not been available to Polish socialists. We have got something to offer, and we shouldn't be shy about offering it in terms of ideas, and so on. And it is not simply enough, in my view, to collect money for solidarity or anything like that. That is a very important activity at certain points. The key thing is that we should be arguing, and we should, just in the same way that if we meet somebody in Britain who partly agrees with us, we should find the point of difference with them and try and argue on that and try and win them to us. So also in relation to the PPSF. We ought to be doing everything that we can, and our resources are very limited in this respect, to try to win an influence amongst them and a closer and closer working relationship so that we can offer them something, and indeed, let's be clear, they will have a great deal to offer us in terms of experience and so on and so on. Because internationalism has to be more than, we are hopefully approaching a period in which internationalism will be for us more than simply a propaganda slogan, but something we can begin to do something practical about. In little ways, here and there in different countries, we see our groups of our tendency growing. Let's hope that we see more and more of this, and that Poland will be the first part of Eastern Europe where in fact we can say, yes, there are people who have read, I don't know, Tony Cliff on state capitalism, and they agree. There are people who have read our analysis of what went wrong in Solidarity, and fundamentally agree that, who are quite clear that they are not building a reformist organisation seeking to mix together parliament and workers' councils. They are going for workers' power in Poland and in the world.